We live in an age of noise. A world where speaking the loudest is confused with being the most powerful. Where silence is misunderstood, even feared. But what if silence is not weakness? What if it's your most devastating weapon? There's a particular kind of silence, not the kind born from fear or avoidance, but one that emerges from deep awareness. It doesn't retreat, it recalibrates, and in that silence, a new kind of power is born, because when you become consciously unavailable, you do something most people never dare to do. You break the narrative that others have written for you. In the modern world, speed is worshipped. Quick responses, instant replies. People argue, defend, explain, and justify endlessly, even if it costs them their peace. But the strongest among us, they don't always respond. They observe, and by observing, they reclaim control. This isn't just silence. It's lucid, strategic, unshakable silence. A silence so sharp it cuts through illusion. A silence that unravels manipulation. A silence that reveals what words try to conceal. Carl Jung once said, "Individuation requires silence, because only in silence can the self be heard." And the truth is, when you stop reacting, you start to see. Patterns emerge. The same cycles you've been trapped in, now visible. You start to notice who only contacts you when they need something. You see how others depend on your availability to maintain their illusion of control. And when you take that away, they panic. Because silence takes away their narrative power. They can't shape the story anymore. They can't twist your words. They can't provoke you into playing a role you've outgrown. Your silence disturbs them, not because they miss you, but because they no longer have access to the version of you that kept them comfortable. It's uncomfortable, and yet deeply liberating, because silence isn't about absence. It's about energetic sovereignty. It's about refusing to be dragged into emotional wars that aren't yours to fight. It's not coldness. It's discipline. And that's what they fear. They fear that you're no longer accessible. Not just in conversation, but in emotion, in vulnerability, in compliance. And so they say things like, "You've changed. You're distant. You're selfish." But these words reveal more about them than about you. Most people are not ready to confront their own noise. Your silence forces them to sit with it, to hear it, and that's terrifying. But silence also has a price. It will distance you from those who only valued you for your availability, from those who mistook your kindness for compliance, from those who never cared to know the real you, only the role you played in their story. The moment you step back, they interpret it as arrogance. Not because you've become arrogant, but because they can no longer control the script. You become incomprehensible to those who only saw your utility, not your truth. But here's what maturity teaches you. Not everyone deserves your truth. Not every interaction is worth the emotional energy. Not every message deserves a reply. Not every conflict is your responsibility. And the more you mature, the more selective you become with your words. Because words are energy, and energy must be protected. You don't owe explanations. You don't owe constant availability. You don't owe anyone your peace. Let them feel discomfort. Let them misunderstand you. Let them gossip. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to become whole, even if it means walking alone. Carl Jung referred to this phase as sacred isolation, a time of distancing, not to escape the world, but to finally hear yourself. And this silence, it's not depressive, it's restorative. It's in that internal space, free from the noise of the world, that something begins to shift. You start to feel your energy returning. You begin to rebuild your emotional center. You reconnect with your essence. And once you taste that inner peace, you stop begging for outer validation. You no longer want to explain yourself. You no longer feel the need to answer immediately. You breathe before you respond. You walk away instead of arguing. You protect your time like a sacred boundary. Because now you've remembered something the world made you forget. You belong to yourself. And from that place, you begin to move differently. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with quiet conviction. Conscious unavailability becomes your foundation. And with it, you become untouchable. Not because you fight louder, but because you no longer fight battles that cost you your soul. The world may call it selfish. Let them. They don't understand what it means to guard your peace. They don't know the cost of giving yourself away too many times. But you do. And from now on, you choose silence not as avoidance, but as power. You choose distance not as cruelty, but as clarity. And you choose yourself, even if it means being misunderstood. We live in an era of noise. Not just the external kind, notifications, voices, headlines, but a deeper, more dangerous kind. The noise of reaction, of emotional chaos, of people scrambling to be understood before they've even understood themselves. But here's what no one tells you. Sometimes the most powerful response is none at all. Silence, conscious, deliberate, razor-sharp silence, isn't weakness. It isn't absence. It's amplified presence. It's energy withheld. It's you deciding that not everyone, not everything, deserves your reaction. Carl Jung didn't see silence as a void. He saw it as the place where the psyche retreats to regenerate. A kind of sacred withdrawal, not to escape the world, but to return to yourself. In that stillness, patterns emerge. When you stop reacting, you start observing. And what you begin to see is unsettling. The manipulation games you kept falling into. The emotional loops of self-sabotage. The way certain people feed off your energy only when you're chaotic, not when you're calm. People panic when you go silent. It's not because they miss you. It's because your silence removes their ability to control the narrative. While you're speaking, they can still play the game. But when you're silent, the rules change. Suddenly, they're left with themselves. With their own thoughts. With the mirror you refuse to hold up. And here's what disturbs them most. When you don't explain yourself, they lose power. Your absence becomes a statement they can't argue with. Your silence speaks in a language they can't twist. Because true silence isn't passive, it's sovereign. It says, I will no longer spend my energy explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. You see, there's a kind of silence that isn't retreat, it's rebirth. It's not the silence of giving up. It's the silence of finally refusing to perform. And yet, this power comes with a price. You will be called distant, called arrogant. People will accuse you of having changed, and they're right. You have. You're no longer willing to be emotionally available to anyone at any time, for any reason. You've realized that every word you speak is an energetic investment, and not everyone deserves that kind of access. That's the hardest part. Because the more you mature, the more you realize, most of your relationships were built on the role you played, not who you actually are. When you stop reacting, when you go silent, when you stop explaining, those roles begin to crumble. People who once praised your availability now resent your boundaries. Those who relied on your imbalance to feel in control suddenly feel threatened. Your refusal to engage becomes an act of rebellion. And rebellion, to the emotionally insecure, is unforgivable. But you're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be whole. And wholeness requires distance. You'll feel guilt at first. Guilt for not replying fast enough. Guilt for not joining empty conversations. You'll wonder if you're being too harsh, too cold, too selfish. But here's the truth. You are detoxing from emotional addiction. You've spent your life conditioned to be second, to over-explain, to overfunction, to say yes when you meant no. That old version of you, the endlessly available one, was easier for people to manipulate. This new version? Quiet, controlled, unapologetic. That version makes people uncomfortable. And that's a good sign. Because silence forces others to sit with the thoughts they've been running from. It exposes the noise they've used to distract themselves. Your withdrawal becomes a mirror. And most people don't want to see their reflection. But don't confuse discomfort with wrongness. You are not being cruel. You are being clear. You're learning that you don't owe anyone your presence. You don't need to defend your boundaries. You don't need to justify why you're no longer responding to dysfunction. You don't need to apologize for protecting your peace. That's what you're walking away from. The soul-deep loneliness of being constantly surrounded, yet never truly seen. And you're walking towards something different. Something sacred. The kind of silence that doesn't destroy, but rebuilds. When you stop pouring your energy into chaos, you begin to reclaim it for yourself. You stop being reactive and start being selective. You stop seeking approval and start building alignment. You realize that not everything requires your reaction. Not every message deserves a reply. Not every invitation is an obligation. Not every argument is worth your peace. This is conscious unavailability. Not arrogance. Not coldness. Not selfishness. But the quiet, grounded decision to no longer make yourself emotionally accessible to those who feed off your instability. It is the inner revolution that says, I don't need to respond to be valid. I don't need to explain to be real. I don't need to be available to be loved. And those who cannot love you when you are silent are not capable of loving the real you at all. So let them go. Let the discomfort wash over you. Let the silence settle in. Because it's in that silence that clarity enters. Peace enters. Self-respect enters. A new kind of strength, the kind that does not scream, but simply stands. And in that standing, something incredible begins to happen. You become untouchable. There comes a point in the transformation when you stop explaining yourself. And that's when the real chaos begins, not in you, but around you. Because once you stop being emotionally available, once you no longer feed the invisible strings others have used to pull at your guilt, your fear, your desire to be accepted, something starts to unravel. And it's not you. It's them. People who once felt comforted by your constant accessibility now feel unsettled. Because your silence exposes their dependency. Your stillness reveals the noise they were hiding in. You've become the mirror they didn't ask for, one that reflects not what they pretend to be, but what they actually are. You see, most people don't want a relationship. They want a role filled. They don't want truth, they want validation. And when you stop performing, when you stop complying with their unspoken emotional contracts, they panic. Not because you hurt them, but because you've stopped enabling them. The collapse begins quietly. It's not dramatic at first. It's passive-aggressive, a shift in tone, a delay in response, a subtle withdrawal of affection. You'll notice the small cracks in connection, the kind that used to make you chase, over-explain, or shrink to fit. But not anymore. Because now you understand the game. You realize that what they're really reacting to is your awakening. The more unavailable you become to the drama, the neediness, the guilt-tripping, the more desperate they become to pull you back in. But they don't ask directly. That would expose the control they once had. Instead, they test you. With silence. With anger. With confusion. With punishment. And you must stay still. Because this is the part where you either regress or evolve. You either go back to your old emotional servitude, or you move forward into emotional sovereignty. This is the price of presence, the cost of choosing yourself. And it's not just paid once. It's paid every time you're tested by a familiar pattern. You'll be tempted to break your silence, not because you want to, but because you're used to it. You're used to being the peacemaker, the fixer, the explainer. But remember this. Every time you explain your boundaries, you give people the illusion they can negotiate them. Let them misunderstand you. Let them sit in their discomfort. Let them feel the silence that once swallowed you whole. Because now that silence is sacred. Here's what they won't tell you. Your availability was never neutral. It was exploited. Not always maliciously, but unconsciously. You became a source of regulation for people who never learned to regulate themselves. A therapist for those who refuse to do the work. A mirror for those too afraid to look inward. And the moment you step away from that role, they don't just lose you. They lose the illusion of themselves. That's what your absence triggers. Not just loss, but identity crisis. Because they built their comfort around your presence, their stability around your reactions. And when that disappears, they're left face to face with the very emptiness they were using you to avoid. That's why they lash out. Not because you hurt them, but because you stopped rescuing them from themselves. This is the real shadow work, not the trendy kind filled with journal prompts and crystals. The real work is holding your center when the people you love start to crumble without your availability. When your boundaries feel like abandonment to those who never respected them. And yet, you hold. Because what you're doing isn't selfish. It's sacred. They will accuse you of being distant. But what they mean is, you're no longer easy to manipulate. They will say you've changed. And you have. You've stopped contorting yourself into shapes that keep others comfortable. You've stopped diluting your truth just to remain digestible. You've stopped bleeding for people who never learned to bandage their own wounds. And yes, it's lonely here. But it's not the loneliness of loss. It's the solitude of rebirth. Because in this chapter, you're not seeking to be understood. You're learning to understand yourself, not as a collection of reactions, but as a whole being. You begin to notice who gets angry when you stop being available. And that's the key. Their reaction becomes your revelation. This is not about revenge. It's not about proving a point. It's about clarity. Because when the fog lifts, you begin to see people not for who you wish they were, but for who they've always been. And in that vision, you are reborn. Not into a better version of yourself, but into a truer one. The greatest shift isn't external. It's internal. When your energy no longer leaks into 1,000 directions. When you no longer wake up checking who needs you. When your peace is no longer disrupted by the emotional chaos of others. You feel it. The quiet. The clarity. The self-respect. You've stopped bleeding for attention. And started breathing in truth. So when the next test comes, when they guilt you, shame you, try to bait you, remember, stillness is power, silence is a sentence, absence is an answer. You are not obligated to be understood by people who only valued your confusion. You are not here to babysit the emotions of others while your soul starves. You are not cruel for choosing distance, you are conscious. And consciousness demands sacrifice. This chapter ends with a choice. Will you return to your role? Will you resume the performance? Or will you step into the discomfort of presence, raw, unapologetic, whole? Because if you do, you'll lose the crowd, but you'll find yourself, and that is worth everything. When you finally stop being available to everyone, something profound happens. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins subtly, like a quiet shift in the room, an invisible presence that makes you feel different in your own skin. At first, the silence feels hostile. You'll doubt yourself. You'll wonder, am I being too harsh? Too distant? Am I pushing away people who care about me? But stay in that silence long enough, and something shifts. The noise fades. The fog clears. And in its place, you start to hear yourself. This is not the silence of absence. It's the solitude of total presence. Not with others, with yourself. The solitude of the strong. Those who no longer betray themselves just to keep someone else comfortable. This is the final evolution. And it's not soft. It's not easy. But it's real. This is where clarity begins. This is where peace begins. This is where you begin. You've probably been told all your life that solitude is a punishment, that being alone means something's wrong with you, that silence should be avoided, filled, escaped. But what if that's the lie? What if the noise was the prison all along? You were conditioned to be available, emotionally, physically, digitally. You were taught to always respond, always explain, always show up, even when it cost you your own sanity. You were trained to sacrifice your peace for connection, your truth for belonging, your boundaries for acceptance. But here's what they never told you. Every time you abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable, you chip away at your soul. And one day, there's nothing left but a shell. But when you choose solitude, not as a retreat, but as a return, something incredible happens. You begin to rebuild. Not based on who they told you to be. Not based on the roles you played. Not based on how others saw you. But from your own center. Let's be honest, this path is not popular. People will misunderstand you. They will accuse you of changing, of being cold, of being distant, of being selfish. But all that really means is, you're no longer useful to their old narrative. You see, your emotional availability was the fuel that kept their illusion alive. When you stop responding, when you no longer react, you expose the truth. They didn't love you. They loved the version of you that served their needs. And that truth? It hurts. Not just them, you. Because part of healing is grieving the connections that were never real to begin with. The roles you played. The identity you wore like a mask just to be wanted. So yes, there's pain. There's loneliness. There's rupture. But this pain is sacred. It's the initiation ritual of your true self. The moment you say no more emotional slavery, no more reactive living, no more sacrificing yourself just to be liked, that's when you cross the threshold. You're not running from life. You're returning to it. This phase is what Carl Jung called the disidentification from the persona, the mask, the social role, the acceptable version of you. Jung believed that only when we shed the mask can we begin the process of individuation, becoming who we truly are. And to do that, you must walk alone for a while. You must confront the silence. You must become unavailable, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Because when you're always available, you're scattered, fragmented, controlled. When you choose availability to yourself first, everything changes. You begin to notice who gets angry when you set boundaries, who withdraws when you don't entertain their drama, who vanishes when you stop giving without asking. And their reaction becomes your revelation. You realize they weren't connected to your soul. They were connected to your accessibility. This is where the rebirth happens, where guilt transforms into clarity, where neediness transforms into sovereignty, where loneliness transforms into presence. Yes, presence. Because finally, you're home within yourself. There is no louder silence than the one that follows a life of people-pleasing. No heavier loneliness than the one that replaces artificial connection. But beyond that valley lies freedom. This is awakening, not spiritual fluff, not motivational hype. Real awakening. The moment when you realize you don't owe your energy to everyone. That just because someone desires access to you doesn't mean they deserve it. That your silence doesn't need an apology. That your absence doesn't require justification. That your boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity. And not everyone will handle that well. Because when you become unavailable, you become powerful. Your emotional absence will trigger emotional chaos in others, because they depended on your imbalance to maintain their illusion of control. They needed your reaction to feel relevant, your guilt to feel righteous, your confusion to feel superior. Take that away, and the game collapses. But this isn't about revenge. It's not about punishment. It's about alignment. You're not rejecting others, you're reclaiming yourself. You're not isolating out of fear, you're choosing solitude as healing. You're not withholding love, you're setting terms for its authenticity. And as painful as it is to lose people, what you gain is far greater. You gain your center. You gain your peace. You gain the ability to choose, deliberately, consciously, powerfully. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of truth. There is a kind of presence that can only be forged in absence. There is a kind of strength that can only be born from solitude. There is a kind of love, for self, for life, for truth, that only blooms when you've stopped seeking it in others. And that is your rebirth. This is not a phase, not a tactic, not a personality trait. This is a new state of being, when you are no longer emotionally accessible for crumbs, when you no longer offer explanations for your silence, when your peace becomes more sacred than your reputation. You don't just change, you transcend. So now the question is not, will they understand you? The real question is, will you finally understand yourself? Because if you've made it this far, if you've survived the rupture, the solitude, the silence, then the worst is behind you. What lies ahead is yours to shape, no longer controlled, no longer addicted, no longer reacting to the noise. Now, you're the creator of your own reality. Awake, unshakable. Welcome back to you. You came here looking for answers, maybe for strength, maybe for peace. But what you found was yourself. Not the version the world applauds. Not the mask you wore just to belong. But the part of you that's been waiting in the silence for your return. And now you're no longer available in the same way. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started listening to you. You've realized boundaries aren't walls. They're doors to your truth. So let them misunderstand. Let them reject you. You're not here to be agreeable. You're here to be authentic. This isn't isolation. It's a sacred rebellion. A return to your own center. So if this video touched something in you, if you felt seen, understood, or awakened, then show it. Like the video, not for the algorithm, but to honor what you felt. Write in the comments, "I choose my peace." Let's see how many of us are ready to live unafraid. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to it. Because the journey doesn't stop here. This isn't content. It's a path back to wholeness. And the next step is waiting for you. So go now. Watch the next video. It's more important than you think. See you there.